Making headlines for this week of January 22nd. Call of the warrior spirit. Sovereign indigenous begin a cabal takedown of their own. The problem with gold. Metal becomes the threat that destroys the fiat currency system. AIIB open for business. Official opening drives another nail into cabal coffin. And the healing of resonant frequencies. Older suppressed technology begins a promising comeback for disease treatment.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. This week I'm going to step away from leading with a financial news story. We all have a pretty good idea of what's going on there. Many are already starting to get the idea that the global economy is now in a massive state of flux or change. I'm leading with a different story, one relating to lawful resistance, although it is not seen that way by authorities and the government. It is one about empowerment in a time of truth and action. Before I get to that, however, I'd like to start by looking at an article by Preston James appearing on the Veterans Today website on January 13th. In this article, James is addressing the Khazarian Mafia, the group that I have been calling the Global Cabal on this newscast. James goes into the details of this group and some of what they have been doing to harm our planet and control humanity. Further in the article, however, he writes the following. But what international mechanism of and being responsible for many human deaths and so much human suffering? What means is now available to prosecute all these master war criminals for creating, deploying, supplying, and paying the salaries of these Daesh mercenaries? What international body or criminal court has the power and the will to indict, prosecute, convict, and sentence these Khazarian Mafia criminals for their war crimes, which include the criminal invasion of another sovereign nation, meaning Syria, the mass murder and displacement of over 1 million innocent civilians from their homes? The International Criminal Court and the UN are toothless and truly a joke so far. These institutions are continually blocked in any serious corrective prosecutions against Israel for its crimes against Palestinians on behalf of the Khazarian Mafia, usually by America, a hijacked Khazarian Mafia or Israeli slave state. Right now, there is no means to bring these master Khazarian Mafia war criminals to justice, especially for their crimes against Russia's good ally, Syria. To stop this group of powerful global criminals requires a number of things. People with the courage to stand up to them, information that can adequately prove crimes have been committed by this entity, people with knowledge of how to use it in a courtroom, and a participation jurisdiction that will hear the case and has sufficient standing in the global arena to have its judgment recognized on an international level. This story, however, is also connected to another story, the one that I referred to at the beginning of the newscast, and I expect to be building on this second news story, hopefully starting next week if all things move as planned, but certainly over the coming weeks. It's not exactly a news story, but the events that have been unfolding are bringing new life to this story and its potential to help many groups of people, possibly in many parts of the world. The first story comes from the west coast of Canada. As longtime listeners know, CVN has been sharing the story of the Grand River Mohawk Indigenous Nation. Their story, or one part of it, centers around the lawful fact that this sovereign Indigenous nation has never surrendered any of their lands to the corporate government of Canada. The government, however, still has stolen lands lawfully deeded to the Mohawks, and until now, no one has challenged this. The chief of the Mohawk Wolf Clan remains one of the few chiefs in Canada leading an Indigenous sovereign nation that still claims its sovereignty from the corporate government and never surrendered their rights to commercial contracts such as the Indian Act, nor to the corporate entity known as the Assembly of First Nations. CVN is honored and humbled to have been recognized by the Mohawk Wolf Clan as being the first international news media to share their story, but also gets to be the first to share certain news with you this week that is expected to lead to bigger things over the coming weeks. I'm going to return to this in a few moments. The new government of Canada, under the leadership of Justin Trudeau, has been receiving praise for its alleged treatment of First Nations people in Canada. What the world has not yet found out, however, is that the same government has not been treating the true sovereign Indigenous nations in Canada in the same way. Last week, I explained how the term First Nations is a commercial term under the commercial law known as the Indian Act. First Nations are also those who receive primary acknowledgement and participation within the commercial corporate entity known as the Assembly of First Nations. To prevent confusion, I will attempt to use the terms corporate or sovereign to help listeners keep track within the story. I would first like to address a press release that has been issued from numerous West Coast sovereign Indigenous tribes. The press release was posted on the Warrior Publications blog page on January 19th. The following are selected excerpts. The following press release is written from unceded and unsurrendered Secwepemc territory under the auspices of tribal law. On Sunday, January 17, 2016, the Allied Tribes, representatives of tribes from across Turtle Island, met at Adams Lake, honoring Wolverine's call for a historic gathering and feast. The last time such a meeting of the Allied Tribes had been called was at Spence's Bridge, when the Spence's Bridge Memorial Letter of 1911 was sent to then Federal Minister of the Interior, Frank Oliver. This gathering coincides with the deadline given by Wolverine to receive a response from the letter he had sent on January 4th, calling for a national inquiry into the brutal attack on the Secwepemc people at Tispeten, meaning Gustafson Lake, as they were defending their right to use their land in ceremony in 1995. The Allied tribes stand together, calling for this national inquiry into the Gustafson Lake standoff from 1995 to bring forward again publicly the issue of jurisdiction and unceded and unsurrendered territory. The Allied tribes stand together to call James Pitawanakwat of Tispeten, or Gustafson Lake, as a defender living in political exile in the so-called United States of America. The Allied tribes stand together to continue to rise together under the law that supersedes all other law, tribal law, pledging to take action to support each other in their fight to protect and defend the lands, the waters, and all of our future generations. The Allied Tribes Declaration of 2016 will be sent to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Attorney General Jody Wilson as well. Wolverine is the chief of the sovereign Indigenous tribe who called the gathering and has been fighting the government since these events took place on their lands so long ago. The declaration, signed by all the sovereign Indigenous nations present appearing within the story, stated the following: "We honor this call today at this historic gathering of the Allied tribes as we stand together in the same stance Wolverine took and continues to take. Number 1. Tribal law is the highest law, the true and original, the only law on our territories. Number 2. The provincial and federal governments of Canada hold none of the authority and none of the jurisdiction they have claimed through violence, deception, and coercion. Any authority and jurisdiction they have used as weapons against us have not, will not, and cannot destroy us. Number 3, we will continue to, as we have since time immemorial, defend our territories in rejection of the colonial, genocidal, military occupation called Canada. Number 4, we have never ceded nor surrendered our territories to the provincial and federal governments of Canada and we will never cede or surrender these territories. The gathering is historic and represents a uniting of the sovereign indigenous voices, at least from the West Coast, but this is expected to expand, especially in light of the news I have now been authorized to share from the Mohawks. The Grand River Mohawk Wolf Clan, having today, January 22nd, approved the final draft of a letter that seeks to inform numerous corporate and political entities that the Mohawks will be taking action to reclaim the lands that were stolen from them, lands that can be lawfully proven to have been given to the Mohawks before the creation of the Indian Act and never surrendered by the Mohawks. And they also call out various acts of aggression and crimes against humanity committed by officials and entities named in the document. The document is addressed to the following: the Queen of England, the Queen's representative in Canada, the Prime Minister of Canada, the Attorney General of Canada, the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs, the Premier of the Province of Ontario, numerous officials within the city of Brantford, where the territory is located, and the Special Rapporteur of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to the United Nations, and finally, to the CEO of Walton International Group, the infamous Walton family that owns the Walmart chain of stores worldwide. The letter is extremely long and includes a lot of evidence supporting their claim. The letter is currently being distributed to numerous potential allies, but will be sent to more groups and individuals around the world over the coming weeks. Excerpts of the letter from the office of Orerakoa, the principal chief of the Mohawk Wolf Clan, states in part the following: I understand that Canada recognizes neither the Haudenosaunee, meaning natural peoples, nor the Kanien'kehá:ka, the name for the Mohawks in their own language, nor indeed the Grand River Mohawks in the English language. Neither my office nor my people have concluded any treaty with the entity known as Canada, to my knowledge. Instead, Canadian entities persist in dealings with entities such as the Six Nations, the elected band council forcibly imposed by the Queen's government in Canada, Freemasons, RCMP, fraudsters, and imposters, as well as their cohorts, including other Crown-empowered corporations such as the New England Company, upon my people in 1923. Recently, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called the Waterloo region an extraordinary hub for innovation, but when the PM said the region hosts innovation at the cutting edge of the global economy, he neglected to tell Canadians that much of the region, specifically within 6 miles on each side of the Grand River, is claimed by my people as having never been ceded by the Grand River Mohawk Wolf Clan. It was never bought and paid for. That is cutting edge and extraordinary indeed, given that Haudenosaunee, Kanien'kehá:ka, people of the Wolf Clan have leased and not surrendered portions of their Grand River territory. It is not within our power as men to sever our covenant with our ancestral lands. Such entities remain neither recognized nor empowered by my office in any way, save and except that some are increasingly considered as defendants in respect of pending legal actions pertaining to theft, fraud, crimes against humanity, and genocide, as outlined in our November 2nd, 2012 Human Rights Submission to the United Nations respecting same, and my December 2012 and January 2013 formal appeals to the Queen. Up to now, the Government of Canada has not involved the sovereign Indigenous chief to participate in negotiations or actions relating to corporate First Nations people, and the government as a corporate entity will only engage with other corporate entities. The chief, on behalf of the Wolf, Turtle, and Bear clans, makes 3 demands. I hereby request that you cease and desist from failure to consult with my office as a duly appointed chief of the Kanien'kehá:ka Grand River Mohawk Wolf Clan, who is not represented by 6 nations in respect of matters pertaining to my Haudenosaunee people. In other words, he is demanding to be included as a voice of his natural people in all issues relating to them. Number 2, I hereby request that forthwith be delivered to my office in earnest a list of relevant treaty and accounting records respecting covenants, trusts, constructive trusts, treaties, titles, territories, and monies or accounts pledged, transferred to or from, and or otherwise of interest and owed to the Kanyen'kehá:ka Grand River Mohawk Wolf Clan, which remain in your possession and or under your custody and control. Number 3, I request that official channels of effective and meaningful diplomatic communication protocols between the parties named in this communication and my office be established in earnest. Some listeners may be able to pick up exactly what is going on now and may also be able to get a sense of what may be about to unfold. CVN will be reporting more on this story, and at least for now, this is the only international program where you will hear about it. What is important to take away from this story are the following. The sovereign indigenous nations on the West Coast appear willing to defend their lands, but it is not yet clear whether or not they are able to carry their battle into a court of law and take on the global cabal on their home turf. The Mohawk Wolf Clan plans to do almost the same thing, but will be able to stand against the cabal on their home turf, and it appears that the powers that be are aware of this, for they are not seeking to recognize or involve the sovereign indigenous nations in any issues relating to their lands or their people. The coming action by the Mohawks has the potential to affect many people in many places around the world, indigenous nations, people, corporate entities, political entities, and more. 2 other things worth noting with regard to this story. In a statement by His Excellency, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, on behalf of the African Union to the International Criminal Court in the Netherlands, one part of a statement he read is as follows. And we have arrived, meaning the African Union, has arrived at the conclusion that the International Criminal Court, whose establishment Africa strongly supported and advocated for, is no longer a court for all, but only to deal with Africans in the most rigid ways with lack of trust and respect of customary international law. This is extremely significant because it now opens the door for a court jurisdiction to handle the case that the Mohawks will be bringing forth. There is now a judicial tool by which to have a judgment rendered against the global cabal. As well, the people of Russia have been petitioning to have a memorial installed in Russia near the U.S. Embassy, commemorating the deaths of many indigenous people at the hands of the colonizers of their lands. To have this recognition of a nation that has begun taking down the global cabal on its own terms carries a significant amount of geopolitical weight also. The implications of this action and this story are potentially so great that I might speculate that it will carry some effect either indirectly or directly on the lives of each of you listening to this broadcast. We have at this time the possibility to unite under an action that has the potential to reclaim not only lands, but also the sovereignty of humans worldwide. It is another tool by which this global cabal can finally be removed from its position of enslavement and control. In other geopolitical news, the World Economic Forum has been underway for the last couple of days in Davos, Switzerland. The forum is traditionally the first get-together of the year for many of the geopolitical and geoeconomic elites to go over what is happening in global affairs. Very little has crossed my desk as far as significant events and revelations. It may seem that the media cover-up is continuing, at least for now. Coming along a little later in the spring, there will also be the Trilateral Commission meeting and also the annual Bilderberg meeting. I was, however, able to find a link to one interesting seminar at the event. The seminar was part of the Open Forum series, where the local Swiss community and global public have an opportunity to engage and interact with experts on global issues. I really wish I could have had the resources to attend at least this presentation. It was entitled, How to Reboot the Global Economy. What I found a bit odd, however, was that one of the presenters in the group was the Prime Minister from Ireland, Enda Kenny. Ireland is one of the countries whose economy was crippled by the fraudulent bailout loans, and it seems that Kenny has not really been a prime example of rebooting his country. According to the article on the meeting, one of the biggest challenges facing the world today is one that ties into many of the other discussions taking place in Davos. The migration crisis, inequality, the gender gap, sustainable development, and how to transition into a low-carbon economy. They will all be nearly impossible to achieve without robust economic growth. The obstacles to this are mounting. Growth is slowing in China. The IMF has again reduced its global growth forecasts, and PricewaterhouseCoopers' annual Global CEO survey found that just 27% of business leaders think growth will improve this year. Here are the things I'd like you to notice about what those sentences say about the meetings. All of the challenges are direct consequences of the abuses of the global elite, and yet these challenges, the fiat banking system, the criminal system of admiralty law that protects it, the systems of governance worldwide that were hijacked by the global cabal and are enslaved to corporate entities and contracts that are again protected by commercial rules enforced as law. These were not addressed. The article says that fixing their issues, such as the gender gap, inequality, sustainable development, and transition to low-carbon economy, they say that these will be nearly impossible to fix without robust economic growth. This is actually incorrect. Those will be fixed by eliminating the source of all the problems in the first place, as I just mentioned. Maintaining the current dysfunctional economy will not fix the challenges they list, but will only perpetuate them. History has shown this to be true. The article is claiming that growth is slowing in China. If, by slowing, they mean that China is cutting back on the use of the US dollar and is no longer playing the same economic ballpark as the global banking cabal, then this might be true to a point. However, China, along with Russia and other countries, are clearly putting the final nails into the coffin of the current economic paradigm. This is why it becomes so important to learn how to read between the lines, but also to learn how to ask different and more direct questions. It does not take a so-called global expert attending the forum to know that there will be very few, and more likely, no good ideas at all to address the issue of how to reboot the global economy. From their perspectives, the first thing that they are going to have to do is admit that the current paradigm is dead, and then take the steps to get over to the new paradigm as quickly, as easily, and as safely as possible for everyone. For many attending this conference, that's not likely to happen, at least not yet. Perhaps they are starting to panic, however. While not suspicious to some, but perhaps strangely suspicious to others, across the pond on the east coast of the U.S., a crippling snowstorm is in the process of hitting Washington and is expected to also have an impact on New York City. Given the market volatility since the beginning of the year and the continued shakedown of the global cabal, and the continued success of Russia and China in encouraging other nations to switch away from the use of the US dollar, one might be inclined to wonder if this storm was man-made so that many of the elites within those cities and living within those areas could make their escape from the region via underground tunnels. Many government employees were sent home around noon, according to some reports, and this would allow cabal members to move around and connect to secret underground networks without any curious eyes wondering what is going on. Maybe the clones will get left behind to get arrested if things start getting a little too hot. I guess time will tell on this one. Going to the Ukraine, and it appears that an agreement, at least in principle, has been reached to allow regional elections to take place within the breakaway republics of the Donbass region. It was apparently in late December that the four signatories of the Minsk Agreement, Russia, Ukraine, France, and Germany, that would allow these elections to take place possibly by the end of January. According to zik.ua News, an English-language Ukrainian news website, on December 30th, President Poroshenko was planning to create a European Union Commission, to monitor the elections in the region. The same website had the Donbass rebel leader reply the following day, saying that the leader of the Donbass separatists, Alexander Zakharchenko, said the EU should refuse to send its monitors as proposed by President Poroshenko, as reported on December 31st. Poroshenko's plan is to entangle a third force in Donbass, foreign troops with weapons. This will only escalate the conflict, he said. Poroshenko wants to pull the Europeans into a civil war in Donbass. I hope the pragmatic Europeans won't let this happen, said the rebel leader. On January 20th, the website reported that elections in occupied Donbass can be held only if Ukraine media get access and weapons and foreign troops are withdrawn, and the OSCE monitors are allowed to supervise the Ukraine-Russia border controlled by Ukraine border guards. This according to Irina Heroshenko, President Poroshenko's envoy to Donbass, said on January 19th. She stressed the Russians and their Donbass thugs do not implement the Minsk ceasefire agreements, which can lead to the peaceful solution of the standoff. She also stressed the results of the November 2014 gunpoint elections that proclaimed the formation of Luhansk and Donetsk breakaway republics, that these were to be cancelled and restored to Ukraine. On January 19th, RT reported that the economic and propaganda pressure applied on Russia by Western nations has backfired and is now undermining the wealth and political unity of those nations. This according to State Duma Chairman Sergei Naryshkin in a parliamentary speech. We can see that the external pressure on Russia continues, both in the economy and propaganda sphere. But our opponents across the ocean, Western nations, have applied excessive effort in their attempt to make us weaker, and now they are undermining the foundations of the Western world's prosperity, Naryshkin said as he opened the new spring session of the State Duma on Tuesday. Naryshkin went on to say that now their own analysts are forecasting a serious weakening of the interaction between the European Union and the United States, and Great Britain has forwarded a number of demands to the EU headquarters in Brussels that can drastically change the very nature of this integration project. We are speaking about a possible return of powers from European structures to national parliaments. We continue to call for all civilized nations to unite their efforts in restoring peace and stability in the Middle East and North Africa. I want to believe that France and Germany will maintain constructive and objective positions in the Donbass talks, and the proponents of the anti-Russian sanctions will understand that within their logic, the sanctions should be slapped on Kiev officials for blatant violations of the terms and conditions of the Minsk Accords. In financial news, from an article appearing on the King World News on January 17th by Egon von Greyers, founder of Matterhorn Asset Management, he writes that very few problems start in the center. Instead, trouble normally starts in the periphery. When an empire falls, it is normally the furthest away provinces where trouble starts. It seems insignificant at the time and therefore is ignored by the rulers. Eventually, the problem reaches the center, but then it is too late to do anything about it. Von Greyers believes that gold has been this trouble existing on the periphery, and its increase in value is moving toward the center, where the fiat currencies are falling from power. Von Greyers writes, "Gold is currently strengthening against most currencies, commodities, and other assets. Probably starting in 2016, gold will also rise against the US dollar. More accurately, all currencies will compete in the race to the bottom. The real value of gold virtually never moves. It has maintained its purchasing power for thousands of years. What moves is the value of fiat or paper money. Governments are, by their very nature, irresponsible and incompetent. They can only hold on to power for a very limited time, applying sound monetary and fiscal principles. Soon, they must resort to excessive borrowings and money printing in order to buy votes." Von Greyers explains something that many people may not understand. He continues by writing, "The gold price is normally measured in US dollars, but that is of course a fallacy. Only 300 million people have the dollar as their currency out of 7 billion. Gold should always be measured in the currency of the investor and not in US dollars. The dollar is currently temporarily strong in its long-term downtrend against many currencies. It makes no sense whatsoever that the dollar is rising with the very poor underlying fundamentals of the US economy." He feels that the US dollar is next to fall. According to him, the world has an unjustified faith in the dollar. The dollar is only temporarily strong in spite of the awful fundamentals outlined above. That is, the undeserved privilege of being the reserve currency of the world and the currency which has been used for trading oil. Many countries are now gradually stopping to trade oil in dollars, and with a price of oil at $30, a lot less dollars are in circulation already. This phenomenon was explained last week on the newscast when Rob Kirby noted that as nations offload their U.S. Treasury debt, a secret arm that few know about and one that exists above the law buys back the U.S. debt, and this is the U.S. Federal Reserve's secret branch known as the Exchange Stabilization Fund. This secret fund has been in existence since the early 1930s and contains off-book money. Because of this, as debt is bought back, it helps to hyperinflate or artificially inflate the U.S. dollar, giving the illusion that the U.S. economy has been strong, when in fact, for many, many years, the U.S. economy has been far from it. It has only been propped up to maintain the illusion, so the global cabal could maintain its control over the system, and so the U.S. could maintain its global hegemonic control, something that is now rapidly collapsing. For those following gold investing, the article contains a bit of information about gold pricing relevant to several countries around the world, and those interested will find the link in the show summary. It might be a safe bet to make at this point that from this moment forward, any financial news relating to the old paradigm of living is not likely going to be very positive news, at least to those people who are still expecting to live and profit from that old paradigm. The new emerging paradigm brings at least a greater degree of hope of a better future than the old one. Those who are prepared to welcome the new paradigm are willing to accept whatever losses and discomfort may be incurred as the old paradigm fades away. For now, however, there are still things to observe within the geo-economic realm as the changes continue to move forward. On January 20th, Gerald Celente, in another King World News article, was quoted as saying the following, "Rarely do I ever put a date on market crashes. I did it in 1987 when I forecast the 1987 stock market crash. That was in the Wall Street Journal. I also forecast the panic of 2008 and the dot-com bust in October of 1999, when I said the dot-com mania, would fail in the second quarter of 2000. I'm now predicting that we are going to see a global stock market crash before the end of the year. It's not only going to be the Dow, it's going to be the DAX, the FTSE, the CAC in France, Shanghai, and the Nikkei. There's going to be panic on the streets from Wall Street to Shanghai and from the UK down to Brazil. You are going to see one market after another begin to collapse. The mainstream media is downplaying this by blaming the carnage on China and commodities. The financial crisis is much bigger than that. This is a global meltdown and it's just getting started. It will bring some countries to their knees before this is over. It does seem to appear that sources like Gerald Celente are either intentionally ignoring all the other signs of change to help contribute to the fear, or Celente himself is unaware of all these other signs. It might be my observation at this time that any source who is truly interested in helping to promote positive and peaceful change will do everything within his or her knowledge and power to at least offer something of hope to people to help them understand this shift that is happening and why it is happening. Humanity has allowed this charade to go on for far too long. Had 9/11 not happened, it has been said that we are experiencing now what we would have experienced back then, but it would not have been anywhere near as bad as it is now. 15 years of government looting, funding unlawful wars, massive legal actions against other corporate and political entities, and funding criminal states and black budget projects, who in turn fund criminal activities against other countries, and it should not surprise anyone that we are reaping what we have sown. You might say that you didn't agree to it. That may be true now, but given how few of the human population were awake and aware in 2001 as opposed to now, it is a safe bet that the vast majority of us all agreed to it. We either did not take the time to get informed, meaning that our ignorance implied our guilt, or we were awake but not courageous enough to speak out for fear of punishment or condemnation, or we did speak out and were punished and condemned, or we did speak out and luckily managed to stay low-key enough to cause those ripples on the periphery that are now moving towards the center. Now is not the time for guilt, nor is it the time for blame. It is a time for action. From what I know of the Mohawk story so far, it is my belief and feeling that what is about to happen can be one huge wave coming from the periphery to send a tidal wave to the heart of the global cabal. One other big nail in the coffin of the global bankers officially launched in the last week. The BRICS Post on January 16th reported that Chinese President Xi Jinping on Saturday attended the opening ceremony of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, in Beijing. This is a historical moment, Xi said. The AIIB will extend China's financial reach and compete not only with the World Bank but also with the Asian Development Bank, which is heavily dominated by Japan. China, however, has repeatedly stressed that the new bank is willing to work with other development lenders. Xi also announced that in addition to subscribing capital to the new lender, China will contribute $50 million to a soon-to-be-launched special fund to support the preparation for infrastructure development projects in less developed member states. The China-led Development Bank was formally established in Beijing on December 25th. Chinese Finance Minister Lu Jiwei was elected as the first chairman of the AIIB Council. Jin Likun was elected as the first AIIB president. The opening of the AIIB marked a milestone in the reform of the global economic governance system, Lu said in a recent interview. Although the U.S. and Japan have not applied to join the bank, many U.S. allies have applied to join the bank, including the Philippines, UK, France, Germany, and Italy. The main purpose of the bank will be to fund infrastructure development projects across the Asian Pacific region. The three largest shareholders are China, India, and Russia, with voting shares reported at 26, 7.5, and 5.9%, respectively. With the global markets in turmoil, Iran, it seems, has managed to enter the global market once again now that its sanctions have apparently been lifted. Middle Eastern stock markets crashed earlier in the week as reports that Iran was releasing more oil into an already well oversaturated market. This was according to the London Telegraph. We also witnessed an interesting little geopolitical play involving Iran at the same time. The geopolitics.co website reported on the story that 2 U.S. Marine craft had allegedly drifted into Iranian waters, where they were picked up by the Iranian military. Reports are unclear at this time. U.S. Republican Senator John McCain, a known cabal warmonger, was quick to attack the Iranian detention of the ships and crew and issued what was basically a call to war. Of course, he was acting on behalf of the Zionist puppets and Zionist leaders within the government. The article writes that while the U.S. operatives were trying to sort it out why the Iranian Navy was approaching them so quickly, they were starting to realize they had been baited. During this time, they must have remembered horror stories where U.S. soldiers were deliberately being sent to die behind enemy lines to start or prolong an existing war. Sputnik News, in the same article, had reported that Marines were crying when they were picked up, but later felt very much at ease in how well they were treated by the Iranian military. Reports from the soldiers being treated so well, and the fact that the soldiers were saying this to the international media, were no doubt causing great fury within the likes of McCain. It has also been speculated that a top Daesh commander was on board one of the boats, although this is unconfirmed. So the geoeconomic and geopolitical chess game is picking up speed. Moves being made by the global cabal are not very well thought out, and moves by Russia, China, Iran, and their allies, including the not yet known U.S. Republic forces, appear to be very well thought out and measured, taking into account all possible moves and also all possible consequences before actions are taken. Meanwhile, Russia Insider is reporting that now Iran and India have embarked on their own trade deals in oil without the use of the US dollar. According to this article, Iran and India have announced that they intend to settle all outstanding crude oil payments in rupees as part of a joint strategy to dump the dollar and trade instead in national currencies. The article adds that this is truly a bold move by Iran, a country literally surrounded by American military bases. We shouldn't forget what happened to Iraq after it announced that it was dumping the dollar. The difference, of course, is that Iran has a little friend called Russia. Also in the Middle East, it is now being reported that the country of Qatar is embarking on new relations with Russia. The article on the BRICS Post website writes that although the two countries maintain considerable trade ties to the tune of $500 million a year, they have, for more than a decade, been erstwhile adversaries. While Russia was the demon in the Western media, Qatar stood against them. It seems, however, that now that Russia has demonstrated its success in cleaning out Daesh, and now that it is gaining greater respect on the global stage, Qatar doesn't want to be left out. The article continues. The previously chest-pumping Qatari Foreign Minister Al-Attiyah was in Moscow, where he praised his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov for Russia's efforts to stabilize the Middle East. With oil going down, the Middle Eastern countries are apparently beginning to announce which team they are intending to play for, and it is increasingly shaping up to the detriment of the U.S., Israel, and global cabal, also known as the Khazarian Mafia. In disclosure news now, and so come the reports leaking out that a 9th planet may have now been discovered. This will not be a surprise to the many who have believed in the existence of a rogue planet that has a different trajectory than all of the planets currently within our solar system. Some have identified this planet as Nibiru, or simply as Planet X. Now, don't get too excited just yet. What is interesting, however, is that the story seems to have been worthy enough to get the interest of CNN.
Remember when Pluto's status was demoted to a dwarf planet, leaving our solar system with just 8 major planets? Well, spacers rejoice, because our 9-planet glory might just be restored. Researchers Konstantin Batygin and Mike Brown from Caltech believe they've found evidence of a massive planet in our solar system. They have appropriately nicknamed it Planet 9. They believe Planet 9's mass could be 10 times that of Earth, and that it dwells far beyond the known planets, with an orbit that is 20 times further from the Sun than Neptune. In fact, Planet 9 is so far from the Sun, they estimate it would take somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 years just to go around the Sun once. Now, researchers haven't exactly laid eyes on Planet 9. Batygin and Brown discovered it using computer simulations and mathematical models. Unusual orbits and clusters of objects were analyzed beyond the orbit of Neptune. They say they're the result of the gravitational force of Planet 9. But Batygin and Brown are not the first to claim that they've discovered a new major planet beyond Neptune. In fact, the hunt for Planet X has been on for over a century. But every promising claim has ultimately been shut down by scientists. That hasn't stopped Batygin and Brown from going public with their theory. They hope to galvanize the scientific community and start a worldwide search to finally see Planet 9 and prove its existence.
Listening to that report, one might be inclined to wonder what the big deal is really about. No one has seen it, and its existence so far depends upon only mathematical models. In a year that has been full of soft disclosures and news stories of Earth-like planets being discovered and new this or new that in space, the fact that this is coming out may suggest that some media outlets are putting out stories like this so people who are new to the subject of disclosure will not overreact, and when the news finally does become more mainstream, especially in North America, it will just be an accepted given, as it pretty much is already in most other parts of the world. Compare the CNN report with this report found on Science Mag website in an article by Eric Hand on January 20th.
Thousands of years ago, the sky gazers of the classical world knew about 6 planets: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Thanks to the invention of the telescope, Uranus was discovered in 1781. But discrepancies in its orbit meant that something was tugging at it. Sure enough, that something turned out to be Neptune. Ever since, scientists have wondered if there might be yet another planet in our solar system, sometimes called Planet X. Now, astronomers have strong evidence for one. A planet roughly the size of Neptune, with a mass 10 times the Earth's, and a thick atmosphere of hydrogen and helium. Just as Neptune was predicted based on its influence on Uranus, the evidence for Planet X is indirect. Astronomers observe 6 small solar system objects and notice they come closest to the Sun in a unique configuration. There's only a 1 in 15,000 chance that this orbital clustering is a coincidence. It is much more likely that Planet X has shepherded the 6 objects into their orbits. This explodes our conception of the solar system, because Planet X would loop around the Sun unimaginably far away in a strange elliptical orbit, so far away that it takes 15,000 years to make the trip. By comparison, Neptune's orbital period is 165 years. Of course, not everyone will be convinced of Planet X until we have visual proof. Researchers are now using one of the world's largest telescopes, Subaru, in Hawaii, and they say they have a reasonable chance of finding Planet X in the next 5 years. Once spotted, we can welcome Planet X as the 9th planet in our solar system.
The story, again, was interesting enough for Kenneth Chang of the New York Times to do an article on the story, as well as Joel Achenbach and Rachel Feltman of the Washington Post. In the Washington Post article, there is a good diagram of the orbits of the solar system along with the alleged orbit of the new planet. For those interested in getting a picture of what they are talking about, this may be the best article to take a look at first. The science and mathematical calculations appear to have made the confirmation, and now the rest is up to astronomers to do their part. Of course, there are those who already strongly suspect that there are people on Earth who are already aware of the existence of this planet, or possibly another one that is the famed Planet X. Regardless, the fact that numerous media are willing to put information like this out into the public realm without the historical, sarcastic abuse seems to suggest that something may be taking place within at least some of the Western media in the push to inform people that we are not alone in the universe and never have been. In a disclosure-related story that will no doubt offer more tantalizing and tangible information for those seeking to support the disclosure of our galactic families, an article appearing on the ABC 10 News website on January 21st reports the following. The truth is out there, now, on the web. The fabled Project Blue Book, the Air Force's files on UFO sightings and investigations, have tantalized and frustrated extraterrestrial enthusiasts for decades. But this past week, nearly 130,000 pages of declassified UFO records, a trove that would make Agent Fox Mulder's mouth water, were put online. Project Blue Book, to those unfamiliar, came from a series of studies on UFOs conducted by the U.S. Air Force. The project, reportedly the third in this series, ran from 1952 until its termination in late 1969. The article continues, noting that UFO enthusiast John Greenwald has spent nearly 2 decades filing Freedom of Information Act requests for the government's files on UFOs and other phenomena. On January 12th, Greenwald posted the Blue Book files, as well as files on Blue Book's 1940s-era predecessors, Project Sign and Project Grudge, on his online database, the Black Vault. The article goes on to describe that Project Blue Book was based at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base near Dayton, Ohio, between 47 and 69. The Air Force recorded 12,618 sightings of strange phenomena, 701 of which remain unidentified. According to a 1985 fact sheet from Wright-Patterson posted online by the National Archives, the Air Force decided to discontinue UFO investigations after concluding that no UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force has ever given any indication of threat to our national security, and there has been no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified are extraterrestrial vehicles. Wright-Patterson also said the Air Force has not seen any evidence that suggests the sightings represent technological developments or principles beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge. Skeptics smelled a whitewash. The private and now defunct National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena charged throughout the 1960s that the federal government was covering up what it knew about UFOs and pushed for congressional hearings. It is being reported that files on more than 10,000 cases are available, and the article reports further that the National Archives has made these files available to the public on microfilm in its Washington headquarters. Parts of the Project Blue Book files previously have been posted online in various locations. But Greenwald said his webpage is the first time the complete files have been posted in PDF form in a searchable database. Speaking of Agent Fox Mulder, the timing of this news may not be a surprise at all to the enthusiasts and fans of the old TV series, The X-Files. As fans will surely know, the program is being brought back to life in a limited run, a mini-series featuring David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson reprising their roles as Agents Mulder and Scully. The show premieres on Sunday, January 24th, and given the rate of slow disclosure of information over the last year or two, the show's producers, I might think, are going to have to deliver some pretty big information to fans lest they feel disappointed that the show did not go far enough in revealing material not yet known by the mass public. All links are in the show summary for this story, including to the Black Vault. Over to Tech and Science news now. It's been a while since we have heard news from Virgin Galactic. Listeners may recall the tragic accident experienced by Virgin Galactic in October of 2014 during a test run of its civilian space liner, the VSS Enterprise. Company founder Richard Branson continues to work on numerous projects within Virgin Galactic, and one of his latest involves the potential use of an old 747 to launch rockets into space for the purposes of bringing better internet access to the people of the world. Jamie Carter, in an article appearing on the Tech Radar website from early December 2015, writes, "Could an old Boeing 747 really give everyone on the planet access to the internet? That's the impetus behind a move by Virgin Galactic to kickstart a new small satellite launch service using a rocket that launches from under the wing of a retired commercial aircraft. Since 1962, when the first satellite, the Telstar 1, was launched, more than 2,000 satellites are in space." Well, that's the number the general public has been informed of anyway. And they are performing many of the services that the world now takes for granted. The costs are getting far too expensive, however, so other options are becoming necessary. The article continues, "That all changes with CubeSats. Miniaturized, modular, and open-source satellites can be as small as 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters. But how do you launch them? We noticed an odd disconnect between the satellites getting smaller and the rockets getting bigger," says Will Pomerantz, Vice President, Special Projects of Virgin Galactic. "So there's an opportunity for Virgin Galactic to do something to help the global community and generate revenue," says Pomerantz. Launcher 1 is custom built for launching smaller satellites from 300 kilograms down to 2 kilograms into orbits that range from 500 to 700 kilometers. Is it the absolute cheapest way? No, it is not. The cheapest will always be to hitchhike a ride into space by buying leftover space from another vehicle already going up. There are problems with that option, however. According to the Virgin Galactic webpage for the project, hitchhiking to space has real drawbacks, just like hitchhiking here on Earth. When you leave and where you get dropped off aren't your decisions to make. There are very strict rules about what you can and can't do during the ride. Those restrictions may be fine if your only goal is to prove that your satellite works in space, but if you are trying to build a business or accomplish a mission, you need your own ride to the right destination and to the right place. This, therefore, leads to the introduction of Launcher 1, the 747 with a rocket launcher under its wing. Virgin Galactic is not the first, however, with this concept. ATK, the company that currently launches rockets with supply ships to the International Space Station, also has an old Lockheed 1011 aircraft that plans to launch Pegasus rockets into space. According to the website, NASA is one of a number of companies that have already awarded contracts to Virgin Galactic for the launching of satellites via its new 747 launcher. Of course, will this story be exciting news for those who have been listening to CVN for a long time? Not likely. Most of those people already know that there exist far greater and far more advanced technologies that have not yet been released publicly. This story represents another step in the minds of many toward that moment when those new technologies will become available. And again, it won't be so shocking because the change will have been perceived as relatively slow. Finally, in health news, a little over a year ago, Joe Martino, writing for the Collective Evolution blog site, posted an article about a healing device that had success many years earlier but was shut down due to its success. Martino wrote the following: "Medical treatments today often involve the use of medications mostly made from various chemicals or chemical extractions from plants. It would be fair to say that modern pharmaceuticals don't necessarily represent a natural treatment, and they are very targeted in how they work. We have all seen the TV ads for pharmaceutical drugs that end with a long, quickly spoken list of side effects that can often be worse than the issue someone is treating to begin with. It is important to note that these aren't really side effects, but are instead the effects of the drug. We don't often look at it this way, but when you do, you begin to realize the absurdity that goes along with many modern treatments for illnesses. He writes about the research and work of a man named Royal Rife. Martino notes that it was in 1920 that Royal Rife first identified the human cancer virus using the world's most powerful microscope. After identifying and isolating the virus, he decided to culture it on salted pork. At the time, this was a very good method for culturing a virus. He then took the culture and injected it into 400 rats, which, as you might expect, created cancer in all 400 rats very quickly. The next step for Rife is where things took an interesting turn. He later found a frequency of electromagnetic energy that would cause the cancer virus to diminish completely when entered into the energy field. The great discovery led Rife to create a device that could be tuned to output the frequency that would destruct the cancer. He was then able to treat the cancer within both rats and patients who were within close proximity to the device. The device was gaining more attention by 1934, but by 1939 it began to receive criticism from the medical establishment. Martino notes the following about the attempts to cover up the device. On the night of the press conference, where Dr. Milbank Johnson was going to reveal the results of Rife's study in 1934, he was fatally poisoned and his notes and papers were, quote-unquote, lost. Fast forward to present day, and on January 21st, Jeff Roberts, in another article on the same blog site, reports on another series of experiments to work on various diseases by using resonant frequencies. Roberts reports on the work of Associate Professor and Director of Music at Skidmore College, Anthony Holland. Holland had a dream where kids would not have to experience toxic cancer drugs or radiation treatments. Many have heard about the ability of the human voice to shatter crystal when it hits the right frequency. Holland and his team are working to apply the same principle to rid the body of cancerous cells. In a TED Talk presentation, Holland describes the project further. The following are selected excerpts from the 17-minute presentation.
Maybe we could shatter a living microorganism, but to do that you'd need some sort of theory to serve as a basis. And we find that basis in a wonderful book called The Rainbow and the Worm, The Physics of Organisms, by a scientist, Mei-Wan Ho. And that book makes a very strong case that living organisms and cells are liquid crystals, or in the least, they have many properties of liquid crystals. Now, we're all familiar with liquid crystals because they are in our laptop computer screens. LCD display, liquid crystal display. And we can change the qualities of the liquid crystals in our computer screen by sending special electronic signals to it. We can change the color and the shape on the screen with these signals. So maybe we could change a biological living liquid crystal with a special electronic signal. But in order to do that, we would need some kind of device. So we searched the U.S. patent database, and we find this invention by a physician, Dr. James Baer of Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's called a resonant frequency therapy device, and its purpose is to induce a resonant vibration in a living organism or cell. And there are two really important things about this device. The first is that it uses a very special kind of antenna. They take a hollow glass sphere, they evacuate the air, they put in some helium gas, and when we send in our electronic signals, the helium gas lights up like a fluorescent light. An electrified gas is called of plasma. So this is called a plasma antenna, and it has many special properties uniquely suited for this kind of work. The second important aspect about Dr. Baer's invention is that the output always pulses. It's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. This is very important because when you're doing research on the effects of electromagnetic waves on living organisms and cells, if the signal is constantly on, you are in danger of inducing heat in those cells. And heat causes indiscriminate destruction. And we don't want that. We want targeted destruction. So we don't have to worry about heat. The hunt begins through a microscope for a frequency which will shatter a living microorganism. Now we have a method of controlling Dr. Baer's device by an input control frequency. So if I put in, say, 100 hertz, out will come 100 pulses per second. If I put in 200 hertz, we'll get 200 pulses. So now we're searching for the magic frequency. And we start with 100 hertz, and we look through the microscope to see if anything's happening. We watch for 5 minutes. Nothing happens. So we try 101 hertz. We look through the scope for 5 minutes, and nothing happens. So we try 102, 103, and so on. Over the course of 15 months, we try hundreds and hundreds of frequencies, if not thousands, until we find the magic combination. The answer is you have to have two input frequencies, one low, one high, and the higher frequency must be 11 times the lower. It's what we musicians would call the 11th harmonic. And when we add the 11th harmonic, we begin to shatter microorganisms like a crystal glass. So now we know we can destroy a microorganism. And the question comes up, but can you target a specific organism with a specific frequency? So in this next video, you'll see a large organism in the center, a paramecium, undergoing disintegration, and swimming all around it, a tiny different organism, which is unharmed. So now we have some evidence that we can target specific microorganisms with specific frequencies. And we make several more videos, and we film the destruction of hundreds of microorganisms. And about this time, we meet a cancer researcher, and we show them these videos. And this results in an invitation to spend 4 months in a cancer research lab trying to shatter cancer cells. This is our setup in the lab. You can see the microscope with cancer cells on it. Here's the plasma tube. And here is my little frequency control box. So first we attack pancreatic cancer. Take a good look at this slide, because the next one will look quite different. After we treat these cells, they change their shape and size, and they begin to grow long, rope-like structures out the sides. They look something like antennas. I call them bioantennas for biological antennas. It's as if the cancer cells are trying to tune in to our signal. It also turns out this is the beginning of a process of destruction for cancer cells. We now know that cancer is vulnerable between the frequencies of 100,000 hertz and 300,000 hertz. So now we attack leukemia cells. Leukemia cell number 1 tries to grow a copy of itself, but the new cell is shattered into dozens of fragments and scattered across the slide. Leukemia cell number 2 then hyperinflates and also dies. Leukemia cell number 3 then tries to make another cancer cell. The new cell is shattered and the original cell dies. But killing a handful of leukemia cells is not enough for a patient. What kind of numbers can we do? In repeated controlled laboratory experiments, independently assayed by the 2 top experts, we killed an average of 25% to 42% of the leukemia cells, as high as 60%. They also determined that we slowed the growth rate of the cancer by as much as 65%, so a double effect. Now we attack ovarian cancer cells. This is a more distant shot. Here you see brackets coming up around the cells, showing groups of ovarian cancer cells which are being destroyed. You can see by the end of the video that a great many ovarian cancer cells were destroyed. Now we attack pancreatic cancer once more. In the center of the screen is a clump of pancreatic cancer cells like a microtumor under the microscope. We turn on our electronic signals and the tumor shrinks and is broken up. The cells are disconnecting, disaggregating, the opposite of forming a tumor. And some of the cells are destroyed. In our most recent work, we attacked the deadly organism MRSA. MRSA is particularly dangerous because it's resistant to many common antibiotics. Thousands of people die every year from MRSA. They have drugs for it, but they have very toxic side effects. We found that our electronic signals could actually eliminate antibiotic resistance in MRSA. Then by adding a very small amount of a common antibiotic, we were able to kill MRSA and slow its growth rate. Since I was a 17-year-old high school student with twin interests in both music and science, I never imagined the two would come together in a cancer research lab. I now believe that the future cancer treatment rooms for children will be a very different place. It will be a pleasant place where children gather and make new friends. They probably won't even know they're sick. They'll draw pictures, color in their books, play with their toys, all the while unaware that above them are beautiful blue, pinkish plasma lights emanating healing, pulsing electric fields, shattering their cancer painlessly and non-toxically, one cell at a time.
Every human being is uniquely different, and CVN is careful to remind listeners that however promising any treatment may be, its ultimate success will be dependent upon several factors. One is the unique condition, that is, one's body. Prostate or ovarian cancer in one individual may or may not be exactly the same as the prostate or ovarian cancer in another individual. Cancer begins with the T cells in the body not being able to remove toxins from the body. Different cultures and different geographies produce different conditions within the body as well. A second or third factor in whether this will work will depend upon the soul-level contract made by each individual involved. If the soul has agreed to a specific experience for the purpose of fulfilling a soul contract level lesson, then it will be up to the individual to determine her or his readiness to move forward with healing. For example, if at a subconscious level the individual is using the illness as an excuse to hang on to an old resentment against family members, the individual may be limiting his or her ability to heal fully. Not being a scientist, it is not my place to say that this will or will not be a factor. As a journalist, I can only report what is there and ask questions, which any listener will have to do to determine whether or not any treatment will assist in achieving the health that one is claiming to be ready for. The links are in the show summary for any who are wishing to do more research on the subject. In this week's Final Words, I'm going to take a break after several weeks of exploring the darker side within ourselves as we address the changes within ourselves and our world. I think I've given people enough to reflect on regarding this topic for a little while. For new listeners, you can go to the show summary to review the transcripts of my final words for the last few weeks if you are interested in this. This week, I'll jump into a political commentary. Some listeners may recall me saying on the newscast quite some time ago, perhaps 2 months or more, that I thought Obama and Trump were not the enemies they were perhaps pretending to be. Over the years, Trump went after Obama on his birth certificate, and Obama would knock Trump down over several years of White House correspondent dinners. I offered the speculation that it was all for show, that perhaps there was another agenda in play. I noted also the connection between Trump and the Clintons, if I also recall correctly. Suddenly, this year, Donald Trump has declared his presidency and he is running as a Republican, and I speculated that perhaps there was a plan to tear down the Zionist cabal inside the Republican Party from within. Surprise, surprise, a few articles have crossed my path and it seems I'm not alone in this speculation. On December the 11th, Anthony Zurcher wrote an article for BBC website asking if Donald Trump is a Democratic secret agent. He writes, Republican leaders are currently thrashing about, holding secret meetings, issuing confidential memos, and making public denunciations as they approach a state of near panic over what Donald Trump is doing to their party. It's enough to make some believe that Mr. Trump may not have the Republican establishment's best interests at heart. Could Donald Trump be a secret double agent sent by Democrats to destroy their party from within? Could this latest iteration of Mr. Trump's political brand be just a ruse, the elaborate cover for a liberal saboteur who has spent the past year setting explosives that threaten the unity of the party he has pledged to support? The article mentions the close affiliation between Trump and the Clintons, and notes a phone call between Trump and Bill Clinton 1 month before Trump announced his candidacy. How could a man with such an astute business acumen come across in such an appalling manner as a presidential candidate? Enter Andy Ostroy, writing for the Huffington Post, who summed up very nicely on December 30th the speculation I have been wondering and sometimes sharing with people. He writes, Thanks to Donald Trump, the 2016 presidential campaign is like no other in the history of American politics. It's certain to be studied in colleges and universities and analyzed by consultants and pundits for decades to come. The old rules, as well as conventional wisdom, have been tossed aside for a whole new, fascinatingly despicable playbook. Now all a candidate needs to do to become the front runner of a major political party is be angry, insulting, confrontational, and totally lacking substance. To hell with being politically correct. Just fire up blue-collar white folks with ignorant, racist, sexist, xenophobic, homophobic rhetoric. But what if instead of being unprecedentedly mean-spirited political campaign, it was actually a pioneering, praiseworthy research project that would turn Trump from goat to hero overnight? Ostroy continues, How genius would it be if Trump were to announce, just as he started to drop in the Iowa and New Hampshire polls, that his campaign was in fact not a legitimate quest for the presidency, but rather to conduct the world's greatest social experiment. Trump would explain that in his experiment, he set out to prove that he could say or do anything, no matter how outrageous or offensive, without consequence, because it would tap the raging anger and bigotry in so many Americans. That in his attempt to appeal to the lowest common denominator, he'd push the envelope so far it would draw these bigots out into the open like scattering cockroaches. That the more inflammatory and racist his rhetoric, the more people would like him. And just when he'd say something so irresponsible and reprehensible that it should finally kill his campaign, it would actually propel him even further. Ostroy outlines Trump's alleged politics strategy, writing that his initial plan would be to offend Mexicans, immigrants, and refugees. He'd call them terrorists and rapists and threaten to build walls to keep them out. If that didn't turn voters off, he'd move on to gays and women. Then he'd attack war heroes and people with disabilities. He'd call his detractors stupid, losers, and bimbos, and insinuate that female reporters were treating him badly because they were menstruating. He'd lie about 9/11, and when, despite all that, he'd incredulously find himself pulling ahead by 20-plus points, he'd call for an all-out ban on Muslims. And this phenomenon would continue unabated. The more despicable Trump's words and actions, the more popular he'd become, until one day, in typical Trump megalomaniacal grandiosity, he'd step before the cameras for the big reveal. I'm leaving the race. I don't want to be president. I never wanted to be president. I just wanted to hold a mirror up to the ignorance and bigotry that lurks dangerously beneath the surface. And you shocked me. The more vile and racist I became, the more you loved me. No matter what I did, I'd go up in the polls. I'd say to Melania, his wife, what do I have to do to turn these people against me? Kill someone? I pulled off the greatest social experiment in American history. In the end, it wasn't Donald Trump whose behavior was shameful. It was yours. I was merely pretending, but you weren't. You've got a lot to work on, America, and you can thank Trump for exposing it. Talk about redemption. The last laugh would surely be Trump's. Adding fuel to the fire of the charade, this week Sarah Palin offered an apparently nonsensical endorsement of Trump in Iowa. How will the American people eat this one up? Forget not that Palin was the vice presidential candidate for John McCain in 2008. Enough said. Ostroy said it extremely well. There is also another opinion worth considering, an option of a man who is very well known in numerous circles for his ability to play geopolitical chess and think many, many moves ahead of the key move he is trying to make, while not taking the bait of those who are trying to trick him into war or forcing his hand. Sean Walker, on December 17th, wrote an article for the London Guardian. In the article, he shares the following. Vladimir Putin has given the Republican presidential hopeful Donald Trump a ringing endorsement, reciprocating Trump's praise for Russia. He is a very colorful and talented man, no doubt about that, said Putin, speaking after his annual press conference in Moscow. He is the absolute leader of the presidential race as we see it today. He says that he wants to move to another level of relations, to a deeper level of relations with Russia. How can we not welcome that? Of course, we welcome it. Considering the Western media is trying to demonize Putin and Russia at this time, here are two smart men who seem somehow to understand what the other is doing, despite what is being said about each of them. Of course, all this could be wrong, and I could be wrong, but looking at the visible signs while also attempting to read between the lines, and it seems very much to me that Obama is burning one end of the candle to stop the cabal, Putin is burning the other, and somewhere in the mix is the man attempting to expose the group of people and everything else that is wrong about the Republican Party and the American psychology in general. For healing to take place at this time, everything must be exposed to the core, and it seems all three men are doing their grand roles in making this happen on numerous levels. For better or for worse, the man appears to be Donald Trump. However, these are purely my own humble thoughts. Links to all stories will follow the transcript of this commentary in the show summary. Create a wonderful week until our next moment of now. So that is the sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary blog, available from the website. CVN can be followed on the Facebook page, Scene page, YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.